I've never seen more imposter syndrome than going into a room of senior executives that have every business being there. They all tell me that they're dealing with imposter syndrome. It's something that is persistent with people that continue to grow and want to be challenged, and they're pushing themselves all the time. And it takes work for me to say, no, I deserve to be here. I mean, I put in the work too. I put in my 10,000 plus hours. Like, I know what I'm doing. I have mastery.
Hey, I'm Whitney.
And I'm Greg, and this is the Unblock Yourself podcast.
We personally know what it's like to feel stuck, living on autopilot, checking all the boxes, but wondering, is this really it for me?
We genuinely love having conversations with people who are living cool lives. So we thought, hey, we should record these conversations. And by having them on a podcast, we can ask all kinds of questions to get to the bottom of how they got unblocked and are living these cool and inspiring lives.
In each episode, we'll have honest and raw conversations about the highs and lows of their journeys.
Once in a while, it will just be the two of us, sharing what we're learning along the way as we build our own lives, and where we're screwing up right alongside you.
So if you want some inspiration and actual things that you can start doing to make bolder moves and get unblocked in your own life, this podcast is for you.
Today we're sitting down with Jennifer Moss, and holy guacamole, ladies and gentlemen, this is a good one. Jen is an internationally renowned speaker, an author of not one, not two, but 3 best-selling books. And her work has appeared in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, The New York Times, oh yes, and more. She's a regular on TV and shares the world stage with fellow thought leaders like Adam Grant on the topic of workplace culture, happiness, and burnout. Jen is somebody who I've been tracking down for years and was able to finally connect with. And we dig into that story a little bit in the first part of this episode, but we go much further than that. Basically, she's a certified badass. Jen generously shares her own experiences with imposter syndrome and how she sees that as a guide rather than something to shy away from. She offers tips on using fiction to build empathy, the importance of rest, and at the end of this episode, Jen gives us a brilliant insight on the topic of hope. We hear in business all the time that hope is not a strategy. Well, friends, Jen gives us an entirely different perspective that has completely changed our minds on the topic. This is a must listen if you are in any way feeling stuck and looking for what's next for you. Jen is insightful, kind, funny, and downright awesome. Please enjoy this conversation with the one and only Jennifer Moss.
All right. Well, Jen, thank you so much for agreeing to be here and chat with us for a little bit. So I got to be honest, Greg has always wanted to meet you. I think you only met relatively recently, right? Like,
Yeah.
Greg, you would meet up with Jim, who's of course Jen's husband, and so you guys would go for coffee and things. And for whatever reason, you just hadn't connected with Jen.
No, there was a specific time where I think I had been messaging with Jim and we were arranging a time to connect. And you were home, Jen, from traveling the world. And I think it was a book tour for Why Are We Here? He told me that you were home.
Yeah.
So I was, oh, this is so exciting. And I went over, we sat on the front porch and he didn't even let me inside to go to the washroom or anything. Like we just sat, we sat on the front porch.
Yep.
And then, 2 hours later, I said goodbye. And I was like, well, and trust me, don't get me wrong. I love Jim. It was like he was keeping me from you for a long.
He was like, yeah, well, he has his rocking chair meetings, which I think are the coolest ever. He's like well known in the community for inviting people over. And like, it's funny that you were wanting to come in because there's people that covet these meetings with Jim. They ask, why haven't I been invited to these rocking chair meetings? Like, it's a big deal if he invites them. So it's hilarious that, there's a desire to come in. And yeah, he's pretty stingy about giving people access to bathrooms, all those things. Like,
go outside. That's so funny.
We definitely had a lot to talk about. It seemed like, immediate alignment, which was really great. I love those kinds of meetings where you get into stuff and you realize that another person is just as excited about something that, that you love and you're passionate about. They love just as much as you do. So It is. It's always nice, especially
Mm.
in your own community, because I find these people in my peer group, but then you don't always find people that feel that way that you can just like, meet down the street. So that's good.
Well, a big part of what got us into that groove, I think you had just come back from Riyadh and you were speaking at, I think it was called the Beyond Readiness Summit.
Yeah, it's run by the Human Capabilities Initiative, which is essentially run by the prince. So he runs
Mhm.
this focus on these 2030 goals, and he's really moving those forward. And that includes this conference that brings people together every year to talk about the future of work and how to get ready for it.
Well, this, and we're going to dig into this because this is a big focus of your work, but maybe just could you touch on that just a little bit? Because we went deep. We were just talking about
Mhm.
how so much of how we think about work here, they're just taking a completely different position from the start in engineering, how they think about the workforce. And I think happiness is one of those key themes.
Yeah, I think what is so interesting about what's happening in Riyadh is that they are actually in this place where it's just they're starting at ground zero, where they're looking at um, how do we diversify from oil? I mean, there's very specific economic reasons why they're doing it, and how do we utilize our workforce, which is young, and grow. And so, the prince came in and decided he's, in his mid 30s. He's decided, okay, I want to have a different attitude about it. And I want to bring a lot of people from around the world to help me figure this out. There's a lot of question about the even me going to Riyadh, people think and question, they're always asking, like, is it safe? Are you going to be okay? There is this very strong bias in interpretation of like what the Middle East is like. And then you go to Riyadh and it's nothing like what you expect. They have definitely had a long history of certain types of behaviors that are obviously not what we're used to in the West. But then this shift has been like, okay, let's get to this point of women empowerment, for example, and diversification, and really looking at measuring and bringing conversations around culture and well-being and anti-burnout, all those kinds of things that they haven't done up until in the last 5 years, and now they're trying to do it all in a decade. And so it's fast paced, it's exciting, there's a huge amount of investment in it. And what has been so interesting is that we see some of the backsliding in the West, especially we're in the US. We're seeing anti-DEI movements, we're seeing less empowerment for women, we're seeing more burnout, just less protection of workers. And our bias gets in the way of seeing that other countries and other parts of the world are going to completely leapfrog us. So it's that perspective has been very enlightening, and I think it shows that with investment and intentionality, you can do something quickly, and you can break the systems, and you tear it all up and start again.
What an incredible opportunity for you to be at the table for those conversations taking place.
Again, I had trepidation about going just in general. And is this, I had a moral conversation. There still is a lot of thinking and policies that are not something that I am necessarily congruent with, but at the same time, that I see an effort being made. And I also feel like I can be a person, an influencer in changing some of those dynamics as well there. So I think that's where I landed. And then when I went there and saw just so much effort being put into it, it was really, I think, a mind shift for me. What I've always said about bringing women, the whole DEI conversation needs to completely change. It should be about a talent strategy. If you're just a really savvy, smart capitalist business person, if you are someone who wants to grow and be competitive, you don't think about whether it's a, woman you're promoting. You think, well, this is a talent strategy, and women increase bottom line, they improve profitability, they're excellent leaders, and they have demonstrated that they have a way higher return on investment impact if they're on boards. I mean, there's just all the data there to say let's just invest in women and diverse groups, And so I think that that's the thing is like the intentions are probably purely capitalist, and they understanding that women make you more financially viable and competitive as a country.
Yeah, we went deep there. That was hours long, and this could probably be the basis of this conversation too.
Yeah.
I think we wanted to take a couple steps back and then dig back into some of this more recent work you're doing too.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask Jen, because I know you started your career in PR, like in public relations, and then you were in California for a little bit, and then came back to Waterloo and had started Plasticity Labs. So just curious, like what that journey looked like and what kind of led you to the work you're doing today.
Yes, I studied journalism in school, and so I always wanted to be a writer. I actually have, I might have shared this with you, Greg, but I actually have my like what I'm going to be in a time capsule that we put into the ground in grade 6, I think, at my school, and it had that I was going to win a award. It was actually going to be the Newbery Award for Children's Literature. I was going to write a children's book and win an award for it. So that was the plan. But essentially, award winning author was the plan. There was always a plan to write. And I was on that focus for my whole life, and then went to school for journalism, switched out of pure journalism to more like, this was before social media and stuff, where it was about media, information, and technoculture is what the program was at Western. And it was brand new. And I was, I think, in the first year of it. And it was focused on broad communications like video production and producing your own, film. And I ran the news department at Western and things like that. But it was really starting to go into like podcasting before podcasting was even a thing. We had interviewed David Suzuki and had put it out on like the Western channel, but it was basically a podcast. So really early days of that kind of stuff, which was interesting. And then ended up meeting Jim, and we got married. And then he moved to the US because he played pro lacrosse, and the team that he played for here was in Albany, got purchased by the San Jose Sharks. And it was just this huge opportunity to go and explore. And then I moved into a PR and communications role as well. I was first a publicist for a film festival, which was really fun for a while. And then, and did a lot of like, I started to build out, which was really interesting then. I started to build out for the first time the independent film collection for the festival that was sponsored by Netflix. And at the time, Netflix was just in these kiosks. So the Netflix films were like DVDs that were in these like vending machines.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think I remember that.
Very early days, a lot of what I did with my work at Rubber Half was create content for and speeches for their senior executives that were based on the research we were doing around workplace trends. We were working with LinkedIn before they were LinkedIn, and we were testing whether they were a viable company at the time. So I'm like, I think I'm user or like 2,500 for LinkedIn. That translated into, I think, a lot of my writing, because I write in a very predictive kind of way. And then my husband Jim got really sick, and we had to go through a really, a big scare, and he was in rehab for a while, and I think that translated into a recognition that we needed to come back to Canada, that we were just too far away from all of those supports. And it was a big life-changing moment for us. And that's what led to, building up a company that looks at how do you live a happier life? How do you understand how much work plays into that happy life, and actually how work makes us super unhappy for most people. And we felt like that was a good place to start. A bunch of things sort of happened to get us there. Jim had a cool project called the Smile Epidemic, where he would, he had this blog on Tumblr, and he would have people put a smile across their face and write what they were grateful for. And that went viral. It was just huge. We were in all these news stations. Jim was like kind of became sort of a mini famous guy for that. Really well known in the happiness space. He became known there because he had started this whole concept. And yeah, and we've just sort of continued on that vein of how do we make work feel like fuel instead of a grind.
Without going into all the details of that, just curious what maybe was the catalyst for, okay, let's make a technology out of this, because it doesn't seem like the kind of thing companies would say, hey, I want a platform to measure happiness. Like, it's not an
Mhm.
intuitive, as we were talking about before, that's not intuitive in our culture.
I think that was a product of where we live and the kind of mentoring that we were getting. There was a lot of mentors that were coming from BlackBerry just talking about how do we turn everything into a technology play. And I feel like at the time, really, if I'm totally honest, which I am now, I think at the time it's like, okay, that sounded sexy, but there was always conversations about productizing. Like, how do we productize this? How do we look at a 7-year exit? And Jim and I had always looked at this as more like legacy. This is something we want to really focus on. We were in a place where we were measuring well-being before Gallup started to measure it. So we could have been the Gallup measure if we had just focused on research and consulting instead of having to work on technology, which is what we kept being told to do. And we were naive and pretty new. So it still is our choice. But if I look back, I think we would have been such a bigger influence in this region. We would have been so leading edge on certain things if we had just focused on what we were really good at, which was like building networks and relationships with people in this space before it was even a space. Around the world at that time, there's maybe only 400 companies in total doing anything on that. So we were super early. And that was maybe like at the time, it was still a pretty decent business. It was maybe like a $30 billion business. Now it's a $3 trillion industry. So I think that sometimes here in KW and Waterloo, we get really hyper focused on the technology plays versus realizing that really successful business happens with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other types of ways of making money, and mentorship should really be focused on identifying like what is that thing that makes you do your work really well, what is the opportunity without it being about an exit, but more around like investment for the long term. And I think we'd have less turnover of our companies here. Blasphemy. Don't say anyone else's
Yeah,
name on this.
only you, Jen. The world around us is rapidly changing. Over the next 2 years, up to 60% of jobs are considered at risk of being replaced or significantly changed by AI. Now more than ever, the world needs more authenticity, more humanity, more you. That's exactly why we built Waypoint Retreat. But it's not your average retreat. This September, we're spending 3 days bringing together entrepreneurs, aspiring founders, creators, and changemakers to finally give their ideas the time and space they deserve. We'll hit pause and take a step back to enjoy the natural surroundings at a beautiful glamping resort just outside of Toronto. We'll get inspired to discover our inner rock stars and prioritize the legacy we want to leave behind. And the experience continues with 3 months of post support to help you take action. We're being intentional about who joins us. So if you've been carrying around an idea that you want to bring to life, we'd love to see you there. You can learn more at vienna-waits.com/retreat. Now back to the episode.
But there is an author whose work we love, Stephen Pressfield, who we talk about do the work in our programming. This idea of just get out and overcome that resistance. But he wrote another book more recently called "Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be," and there's something about that grade 6 you that wanted to write and do that research and have that be your path, but you happen to be in a place where your ass was, so to speak, was where the technology mentors were pushing you in a certain direction, and it took a while longer perhaps to get to where you ultimately wanted to be, but you found your way there. Before we get to that though, we listened to you on another podcast, I think it was Fried, and I was talking in a conversation about burnout, but you talked about being at plasticity and just hitting a wall. So, how did you arrive at that wall, so to speak? And the second is, what did recovery look like for you, just stepping away?
There were a lot of pain points that I wasn't recognizing. And I think I'm a driven, ambitious, woman. And sometimes that looks like, you're going to be like, Nancy, what is Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding? Like, if I'm ambitious, I'm like chopping at people's ankles. And I think that, you know, it, I don't believe in that. I feel like you can have all of those drives, and especially as a woman, but you have barriers because you have a hard time with that mindset. Perfectionist tendencies lead to burnout. You also feel a need to then be everywhere all at once. So, I wanted, because in this region, I was one of, very few at the time female co-founders. There wasn't a lot of women that were being supported. They hadn't even built up any of that programming to support women as as tech founders. Most women would only get about 7% of the funding. That's actually gone down to 2% today. It's really not great. We were married co-founders, which I guess adds an extra like triple X on on the checklist of things that they don't want in for people financing you. It's too risky. Then we had a company that was on focused on happiness, which was also not even an established company. So we had to convince people that that was something that CEOs would invest in and CFOs would pay for. And then my role again, it's like, so then I was joining every single board. I was on the board of Women in Tech, and I was taking on all these different pro bono things and mentoring, and it it just became so much more of my time was spent just in being a woman in tech than actually doing the work, which was not great. And then it is like you're getting pulled into a lot of different directions. I mean, investment in technology professionals, when you really want to be a consulting firm, means like really high value expenses. You're looking at, CTO is $250,000, and that was like working half price basically. So there was just a lot of these tiny little things because we didn't know what we were doing yet, there was friction, always sort of feast or famine. And so we stayed alive for a long time, but there was a point where I just thought like I am doing so many things, there's so many frictions, feels like we're always just getting close. And there was so many barriers and blocks that I felt just, I don't know, I just came to a point where it was like I couldn't work enough or I couldn't do enough. And that got me to a point where there was brain fog, like I wasn't thinking straight, which comes with chronic stress and burnout. You make mistakes, you're more volatile, you're emotionally dysregulated, you're fatigued, you're exhausted to the point of not wanting to get up in the morning, and you get sick. I mean, your relationships suffer. All of these things start to happen, and so the thing that was already tough was compounded, and slowly, I was just kind of disintegrating, and it created a lot of conflict too between Jim and I because I was just not myself. I was having a hard time taking direction, but I think that that's actually
Yeah,
like very difficult thing when you have like husband and wife. Like
we know that well. We know
I'm
that
not a
well.
person that loves taking directions already. So, when your husband's trying to like lead a company and has to tell you like what's going on, it can be really difficult. It bleeds into your, personal life. So there's just a lot. And then I hit a wall and I had to stop working. And I, at the time, our daughter Willow was in a play in Ottawa. I just decided I would stop working and have the family, and we would go there. And Jim stayed back and kind of ran the ship, which wasn't really great either because then he's there on his own. He's been totally abandoned by me, and of course I feel that way, but there's nothing you can do. And that's something that I've come to really understand and have so much empathy now. And where the book came out of, it was, why are all these systems holding so many of us back, and why are they even particularly harder on vulnerable groups and women? And I think that's why, like, that book was so important to me to write.
And what did that recovery look like for you, Jen?
Well, and I forgot to add a major component of this. I had been having children and nursing or pregnant and babies for a decade. And we had Lila in the middle of like the first year of that, around the first or second year of the startup. And I'm, she's 3 weeks old, and I'm, doing the whole lean in Sheryl Sandberg thing, like bringing the babies to meetings. And it's like total, your everything, brain, body, your whole life is turned upside down. And it's so this, and then I'm just thinking, oh, well, this is so great. I can lean in, I can have my baby with me doing things. And it's like, no, I should be focused just on this. And again, my choice to start all these things and invest in it, and not, and not take that time. Like, there's still agency there, so it was choice. But you just don't think like that. And so when it was recovery time, it was probably
Mm,
for me, it was like trying to steal some of that back. And it was just pure focus on kids and being with them and being present, and needing. So the first 2 months, this is a big thing for people recovering from burnout. They don't understand that rest without guilt is the only way forward. Sometimes if you've hurt a body part or broken a leg, you're told to keep your foot up, or you're not supposed to put pressure on it. That's how we need to be thinking about healing from burnouts. We shouldn't be
mm,
putting pressure on it. We should be, lying down,
mhm.
like putting that foot up. And that's what we need to think about with our brains, with our hearts, with our minds. We actually do need to recover. And that requires stopping doing any work. For me, that was it. I was thinking it was 4 or 5 months. And then I slowly started to do some things that I thought were healthy for me, like things that I felt like I could control, that would give me quick wins, that would rebuild my professional efficacy. And then it was just a slow, kind of incremental journey back to where I am today, which is, this is the exciting part, is like I feel 10 times more, effective. And I feel like I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm living, with integrity, and I have a values alignment, and I love my work and I love my job, and I know I'm really good at it. So it takes time, but you can not just rebound, but have, like, what we've talked about, Greg, this like post traumatic growth, where you go through something really challenging, but it actually makes you stronger and better for it.
Yeah, I love that. I think the rest without guilt is really hard for people. I don't think anyone does that well.
No.
Yeah. So, Jen, I'm curious because a lot of your work centers around like helping organizations. But I'm curious about people like ourselves, or solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, people like you and Jim. Like, is some of your research and tools, can some of that be applied to businesses like ours?
Yeah, when you look at the 6 root causes of burnout, it's overwork, unmanageable, unsustainable workloads. It's lack of community, so like isolation and loneliness, which happens a lot within entrepreneurs. It's lack of fairness, so feeling like arbitrary rules or policies, or these kinds of expectations, which you can get from investors. Lack of pay and rewards and recognition. So a lot of entrepreneurs are constantly dealing with a sense of like frustration with trying to get money, get clients, get customers, and they're never really recognized because they have to recognize themselves, which they're not good at. And, it is that values and skills mismatch too. So you can feel like you're being brought in a different direction, or you need to do this because you need to be able to, eat what you catch. So you're taking on clients or customers that might not actually feel like they match your plan or the future of your job. And I think so. A lot of the 6 root causes of burnout that I talk about organization wide and how we need to change that and understand that in organizations, for entrepreneurs, they're basically the employee and the leader at the same time. So they're feeling all of these things because of just the nature of what it means
Mm.
to start up a business. And there's very little escape from that. And, you as a leader to yourself, you're not necessarily going to put on the brakes of those things. We're all beholden as an entrepreneur to so many other things, but if you can figure out, okay, how do I look at this from a leadership perspective, and what would I be telling myself, and how do I create those boundaries, and how do I make sure that the values are aligned with what I'm doing at all times, and how do I not get off course? And I created this deathbed regrets schematic for life. Like, that was my thing. And so that's really changed in how I make decisions. Things that seem so good and would be so worth it, making lots of money doing something, but it's not aligned to that value, then I say no. And that really helps, because it's hard to turn down money. It's hard to, for your business. And I think that that's what more entrepreneurs need to do, is put on a leadership hat. Because one of the things at the happiness, the happiness company, we're happiness experts, and I was the least happy. It was like the least happiest time in my life. And I felt like a fraud. And I'm telling people this is really important, like for you guys, you're telling people to unblock themselves, but if you're blocked, then it's like you can't be blocked while you're telling someone to be unblocked. And I think I can't be giving advice on people's happiness if I'm unhappy. I need to do the work to make sure that I'm living the life of a happy, well, you know, a well life. And it's never like I'm not unhappy at times, but when it's chronic unhappiness, that's a problem. So this is something that I feel like the more aligned I am on that part, the more my company continues to prosper.
Well, this is something I struggle with, like imposter syndrome. So, really curious if that hits you. Like, you're just so badass, Jen. And, I've listened to you on podcasts and your books and on TV, and you just definitely appear to have it all together.
Mhm.
And so, just curious, like, does that hit you? And, how do you deal with that?
I love that you asked that, because I've never seen more imposter syndrome than going into a room of senior executives that have every business being there. They all tell me that they're dealing with imposter syndrome, because I think the more that you get closer to that thing that you believe is going to be what unblocks you from imposter syndrome, the more imposter syndrome you get, because you're now elevating with other people that you've been maybe thinking are like, I fangirl all the time about these people that I'm working with. And I think, oh my gosh, like I shouldn't be here. These are people that I've admired, or these are people that are in this work and have been in research for a long time, all these things. It's something that is persistent with people that continue to grow and want to be challenged, and they're pushing themselves all the time.
Yeah.
And it takes work for me to say, no, I deserve to be here. I mean, I put in the work too. I put in my 10,000 plus hours. Like, I know what I'm doing. I have mastery. I think there's a healthy sort of appreciation for people that are incredible, and you can admire them and respect them. But when it's this persistent state of feeling like, yeah, like I shouldn't be
Mm.
here, is it can be really dangerous. And I have had times like that, and I still do that. And I tell Jim, like, I don't know what, like how this happened. And like, I'd feel so scared, and I'm so nervous about this thing I'm doing with these people. And he's great. He's just the best pep talk. He's like, don't talk like that. We have this thing when people say, and the kids too, we have this thing where they're like saying, like, I'm not good at this. We say, don't talk about my friend like that.
I love that.
And he'll remind me. This was a nerdy saying that I came up with, so I don't want to embarrass Jim and make it sound like that's like something that he's come up with, but he does remind me that I say that to the kids all the time. And so I think it's been really healthy to say, yeah, like if I was talking to someone that I knew that had all these wonderful things, I'd say, come on, like you're amazing. And we have to do that more for ourselves.
Yeah, we do. That narrative is just so strong,
Yes.
and we have to be careful what we say, right?
Because our language becomes a reality.
I think it's really generous of you to just offer that perspective, because I think it's something we all deal with. I heard a really cool an entrepreneur just tell this story about climbing a mountain in Fiji and getting to the top of this mountain and looking out and seeing another mountain on the other side of the ocean, just miles and miles away, and asking his guide, oh my gosh, is that part of Fiji too? How long does it take to get to that mountain? And he talked about this guide putting his arm around him and saying, you really need to start appreciating the mountain that you're standing on and not be so concerned about the next mountain. It was this beautiful illustration. And I think his point was we're all standing on a mountain of brilliance, but we just often don't see it.
I love that. I love that. That's such a wonderful way of thinking about it. And we do, I do tend to not celebrate the milestones as much. And now I do work on that to say, okay, I'm here. This is a great place to be. And I'm kind of doing that this summer with the sabbatical, taking some time off. And I'm doing, maybe a couple of hours of work in the morning, but really focused on just recovery,
Mhm.
following my own advice and taking time to just appreciate what I've done in the last little bit, reconnect with family, making sure that I'm spending lots of time with them and having a guilt-free summer, which I am. I'm like really enjoying myself.
Good for you. Good for
Yeah,
you.
and that is it's not easy for me. So, and it took time. That's why I think when you're taking time, like you can't just take a week off to, that whole idea, oh, we gave our employees a week off to recover
Yeah.
from burnout and then nothing changes and they go back and start burning out right away again. I mean, if you're really going to take a rest because you're feeling at that precipice, you need a solid amount of time to recover.
Yeah. So, as we bring things to a close, the question we aim to ask everybody we bring on into these conversations is for a piece of advice to anyone who's feeling stuck. And if I could elaborate on the question a little bit for you because of what you've written about in Why Are We Here, and this idea of hope. And it's such a central theme in your book. And this idea, I think it's Snyder's hope theory, where he talks about there's two dimensions. It's, do I have a way to achieve, and am I motivated to achieve? And so if you could give some advice to anyone who might be listening to this who's feeling stuck, and maybe that's a bit of a backdrop for diagnosing, do I have a pathway, or do I just need to get motivated, would be a really cool direction for you to take any advice you might give.
Well, and I think that's really wonderful about Snyder's theory. It's really about, okay, if this pathway doesn't motivate me or, then I need to find a plan B or plan C, write as many pathways as you can until you feel motivated or you get there. But, the idea of, for sure, people are feeling stuck everywhere right now. I mean, we've got the highest level of active disengagement that we've seen in a decade. We just see women dropping out of the workforce because they are feeling burnt, high levels of burnout. I mean, we're not in a very healthy place. And Gallup's calling it the great detachment. So it's more like this just feeling of like, what's the pointism? The reason why I wrote Why Are We Here is based on the question that is feeling increasingly pervasive about the work we're doing. Why am I here? Why are we here as leaders? Why are we here, as employees, as a workforce? So many reasons why all these different demographics like Gen Zs are like, what's the point? Xers and boomers have modeled this terrible experience of work and they're all burned out and quitting. Like, this is not what I want to be doing. One of the things that, you've heard, many people have heard, hope is not a strategy, hope is a myth. And I love changing people's minds around that because the idea of the academic research around it is, Snyder's theory is that there's sort of these three components. One is, just agency. So the ability to choose and come up with goals. I mean, that's really important. It's just like come up with a goal. And so often we think about goals as big, huge, like Lulu calls them big, hairy, audacious goals. So, I want to cure cancer, like I want to run a marathon, or, all these big, huge goals that we have. Instead of looking at what Snyder says, is we need to have micro goals. And when you look at therapists, what they look at for developing hope is really like, hey, you're depressed, like severely depressed. How about you get out of bed tomorrow morning? Like, set an alarm, get out of bed. How about now that you've gotten out of bed for 3 weeks, how about you take a shower? Like, that's how we need to be thinking about goal setting, is that those are goals. Those are significant goals. And so the idea is like, okay, so now I have a goal. I have a goal that's reasonable, challenging enough, but a goal that's reasonable that I feel like I can accomplish. So for everyone, that's different. And then let's create a plan A, a plan B, a plan C to get there. That's really the second step, is like, okay, I'm going to make plans. So no matter what, my brain can rest in that if this thing doesn't work out, I've got this other thing to rely on. I've got this other way of doing it. And so you kind of let yourself off the hook of feeling like this one plan I've made to get to that goal is the only way, which can create fear and likely demotivation, and then you won't execute on your goals. And then the third part is ensuring you have the resources to get to those goals. So making sure that I have the ability to, to get to, say, for, a hope goal for a week could be just cleaning my desk. A hope goal for the week could be reaching out to that one client that I've been procrastinating on, or dealing with that one customer that I've really been avoiding. Like, it can be that one thing that you have to do, you do it, and at the end of the week you go like, you were epic. Good job. That was great. And then you create a vision towards those bigger goals, but they're not reliant on that thing. Every week can be something totally different in a personal, professional way. And that helps you just like create a hope strategy, which is really critical for people to feel like they can get there, they're unblocked, that they're motivated, and they start to feel really proud of themselves. And that confidence leads to you feeling more effective, which then leads you to feel more motivated.
That's awesome. And I don't know if you know much about our Unblock Yourself program, but that's essentially like what we do. We help people, set these goals, because people are really bad at it. Like, they don't set goals for
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And, we help hold them accountable and all those things. So I think we're on the right track, which is awesome.
Yep. I love that. This is a whole thing that I'm telling organizations to implement. And so the idea that you can be doing that for them, I think could be a major win for leaders that are so sandwiched and so
Hmm.
burned out and so tired they don't know how to execute these strategies. It's like, yeah, you can have people help you get your team to get there as well. But sometimes, I feel often an external source is really a good way to have people not come in where, where they are already unblocked, because they don't have the bias, they don't have the cultural kind of the heaviness, or the sort of the
Right.
history that can hold you back. And most people then are also asked internally to volunteer their time to help with mentorship and things like that. It's so good to have an external resource that comes in and just can come in a way that really guides people without, all that history holding them back.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have one last question. And yeah, I'm curious how you're going to answer this one. But we ask everybody, if you have one book, or maybe it's a podcast that you'd recommend that maybe has inspired you, and you can say your own, that's fine. We're definitely going to put your books in the show notes for people anyways. But if you have one that's inspired you, what would that be?
God, I have so many. I read a lot. Like, I read every day, and finish a lot of books. And there's been a few that have, I think, really inspired me. And it's interesting because I read mostly fiction. I read very little nonfiction. I read the books that I need to for, for work. And because I am into so many research papers, all I read is fiction. And there's this book called A Little Life. And I don't want to say the last name because I always butcher it. I want to say Yingara, but maybe you can find it for me so I don't say it wrong. But this book, A Little Life, really did transform me. And I would say Cloud Cuckoo Land too by Anthony Doerr is another one that really inspired me. They're like my top fiction. And I think the reason why these books were so impactful on me were that it was a story through history. Like it spans, especially Cloud Cuckoo Land spans like from way in the past, like 1600s, 1500s, all the way to the future of like space and living in space and what that would look like in that post-apocalyptic world. But every single part of that story of the Cloud Cuckoo Land is about a thread that is a book, that is an idea that moves through time. And both of that, A Little Life really is about this like manifestation of overcoming. And same with Cloud Cuckoo Land too, is just this power of overcoming, but also guiding society in a way that's principled and ethical and moral and kind. And that for me is how I want to leave my legacy, is, writing down how, I feel. And it's, again, not in an egotistical way, like I'm not changing the world, but your words can and do matter. And when you write them down and other people can read them and share them and pass them along, it can maybe influence people in a small way. And so for me, that's what I think we need to get back to a bit. We've lost a little bit of that, but there is a lot of empowerment and I think a lot of hope that if we still hold on to these traditions and continue to pass them along, good people like you guys and people doing good work will make things a more hopeful place in the future.
Yeah, those are big, that's high praise, and we appreciate that, Jen. But It's a Little Life, Hanya Yanagihara.
Yes. I have to figure out, I need to spend some time because I say that book a lot and I say the same thing. Like, I don't want to say the last name wrong.
Well, thank you for both of those, and it's nice to get recommendations for fiction. I think I tend to just only stay in the nonfiction lane.
Fiction is an excellent tool. It's really highly recommended to build cognitive empathy. Like it really is one of the most travel is really critical for building empathy, and reading fiction is excellent for building empathy. It works within the brain to construct the stories and having to visualize putting yourself in people's shoes. And so you do that constantly by coming up with ways of empathizing with characters and understanding characters that are flawed and finding the good in people. And it builds up your empathy, part of the brain, the more you read it.
I think that's great advice. Thank you for that. And thank you for your time today. This feels like a round 2 is in order. And we'd love to talk to Jim, and then maybe we will have that follow-up conversation in the future where we can just dig into what you were starting to talk about, the complexities of running a business with your partner, which we live every day. And there's great things about it, but there's also some interesting challenges.
Not so great things about it. Yeah.
And complexities running a business in general.
Exactly.
It's not even the husband-wife thing. It's just,
Business
dealing
partners.
with all those things, that come with having to be in a volatile market, or some political shift can change your whole company. I mean, there's so many things that can happen that can put you off course. So yeah, I think that could be a very dynamic conversation.
I've learned we're at highest risk for burnout.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Jen, thank you for the extra time. This is so great. We're just so grateful for your time.
I'm so glad to be here. It's always great to talk to you both.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Unblock Yourself podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow and rate the podcast. Your ratings and feedback mean the world to us. We'd love to stay connected with you via our bi-weekly newsletter called the Vienna 5, where we share ideas and advice that we found helpful on our own journey to live with more intention. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Instagram. For those Gen Z listeners out there, no, we're not on TikTok. But if enough of you ask for it, we'll just have to do it at some point. The links to find us on social are in the show notes. The Unblock Yourself podcast is edited and produced by Bespoke Productions Hub. Thank you for being here.